because in answering his friends, he also tells us a great deal about what he thinks of God and how he feels about the situation. If you'll remember, since it's been a little while, in verses 1 through 13, how can I be righteous before God? And then we started in verses 14 through 35, how could I meet God in court? In verses 14 through 19, what would I say? He is too powerful. And then in verses 20 through 24, if I could declare my innocence, what then? It doesn't really matter what I say, matters what God says. And he's two more sections here. This next section is going to be verses 25 through 31, and we'll read it here in just a second. If I try to be happy, what good will it do? And so let's start in verse 25, and we'll read down through the end of the chapter here. Now my days are swifter than a post. They flee away. They see no good. They are passed away as the swift ships, as the eagle that hasteth to the prey. If I say I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my heaviness and comfort myself. I am afraid of all my sorrows. I know that thou wilt not hold me innocent. If I be wicked, why then labor I in vain? If I wash myself with snow water, and make my hands never so clean, yet shalt thou plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall abhor me. For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment. Neither is there any daysman betwixt us, that might lay his hand upon us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. Then would I speak, and not fear him. But it is not so with me. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, tonight, help us to encourage our hearts, even in the midst of all of this difficulty. Job sees you high and lifted up, and that is what you are so worthy of. You are always high and lifted up, no matter how awful or tragic or difficult the circumstances or the situations are that we're dealing with. Job is struggling, and it's not just loss of things, humanly speaking, but he is struggling with his relationship with you, because some of the most difficult times in life are when you seem to be silent. Thank you for the completion of your word, and for the fact that we can understand things that Job could only look forward to. And there's so much a clearer and better understanding for us now. So many things that we don't have to just accept by faith, because we have your completed word. I thank you very much for it. In Jesus' name, amen. I was pondering this week in looking this passage over. Job makes comments as he's going along here, and I couldn't help but think that there were passages, verses coming to my mind, things that we say all the time to each other when we are encouraging each other. And Job doesn't have that. He has the promise that the Redeemer is coming someday. But you say, man, I would have loved to live in the time of Christ. Well, think about how much easier it is, practically speaking, for us that we get to live in the time of full revelation. When we have the completed word, and when we everything can make sense because we can see the picture of what's going on. Now, we don't fully understand the end times. We understand enough. But still, a lot of the confusion that they had about how things were going to happen and what was going to go down is alleviated for us, because we have the word and we have the opportunity to dig into it. But even so, Job is impressive. This is poetry. Yet it's masterfully written. And you'll see as we go through here, some of the things that really tell you, these three friends can say whatever they want to about how unholy or unrighteous that they think Job is. Job has an excellent view of God. He just has an excellent view of God. He starts off this section here, and he says, if I try to be happy, what good will that do? In verses 25 and 26, he sums it up with, time flies. Now, we know that. But it's interesting the way he puts this together, because he says, now my days are swifter than a post. We don't use that word a whole lot. I mean, they used to. We say the mail or a courier or a messenger would be the same thing as a post. But if you had news from battle and you were trying to get back to the king, you didn't dilly-dally around. You didn't take your time. You went, the expression, post haste. You have a post, so you make haste. You're getting after it, trying to get the news to whoever it is that you are supposed to deliver it to. And so you're traveling with an urgency to deliver that message. Crazy, because I'm sitting here thinking, how would we say this today? And then I thought, well, everything would be completely different, because you'd say life is faster than an email, or life is faster than a text. I mean, you text somebody and their phone's ding, there it is. And you're like, well, life isn't that fast. Well, it depends, how you're looking at it. Because I stumbled upon something in a commentary about a gentleman who was saying, when Job makes his statements about the things that he sees in the sky, no way of knowing for sure, but if you were to date those things and saying, reasonably speaking, Job lived here, so to be able to see these at this part of Job and to be able to see these at this part of Job, it would have had to have been approximately, and it was like 1800 BC, 1887, something like that, like 891 years after the flood. Best guess. But he also said, we don't know for sure where he lived, and we don't know which direction for sure that he was looking, and so, you can't say that for sure, okay? But you look from Job's perspective at way BC to our time now, and if you lived 110 years, it'd be sending a message on a text and dang, somebody's got it. Relatively, the longer a time span, the shorter life seems to be. And Job's saying, well, listen, if I tried to make myself happy, part of the problem is time flies by, and by the time you put your life back together again, do you really have much of a chance to enjoy it? Especially, remember, he's in awful health. You get the feeling he's not sure that he has much time left at all. And then he uses a second term here, and he says, they flee away, like someone running for their life. You read through the Old Testament battles, and you think you have the battle won, and then all of a sudden people start running, and next thing you know, the whole army's running. They don't stop, take down camp, gather up all their stuff, grab their gold and their silver, and move off. No, they leave everything behind because they're fleeing for their life. And so that's the pictures that he's giving us here. And then he goes on and he says, they are passed away as the swift ships. Now, in the English, we don't understand this, but this is a rarely used word in the Hebrew, and it's the word for a papyrus. In other words, a reed ship. And I believe he's specifically saying this. They translated it speedy ship because it's not a cargo ship that somebody would have loaded a bunch of weight on and here it is plugging along through the water. That's not how Job is looking at his life. He's looking at his life as a pleasure craft, one that's made of reeds, very lightweight, and it wouldn't take nearly as much wind to get it moving, and that thing would go moving pretty quickly when you got it started. So think pleasure craft instead of one used for hauling. We go fishing up here from time to time. He's not talking about pontoon boat. He's talking about 6:30, 7 o'clock when they turn the tournaments loose, and those guys slam them things wide open, and the bow's sticking out of the water, and they're jumping waves at 90 mile an hour. They're gone. That's Job. That's how he's viewing his life. And then the last one he uses as the eagle that hasteth to the prey. Eagle flying can be very majestic and somewhat slow. But notice he says, hasting to the prey. When an eagle is hunting and they can dive at up to 200 miles an hour. They can penetrate a few feet underwater to grab a fish. Now that's moving. Fish don't hardly have a chance to react because they're moving so fast. By the time you see them coming, it's too late. And that's kind of the point that he says here. And then he closes this first section and he says, they see no good. In other words, they experience nothing good. There's no enjoyment. Job 7:7, I see Psalm 34:12, I cannot see John 3:36 and 8:51. All talk about seeing as something that you experience, something that you are able to enjoy. Now, we use phrases like time flies when you're having fun. And it really does seem to go by when you're enjoying it. Job's not enjoying it, and he's still saying what? Time flies by. And Shakespeare has a lot of famous quotes about how time moves and how short our life is. But one of the really famous ones is, out, out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. And usually, a lot of times, a play is longer than an hour, but that's not very long. And here you have an actor who's strutting, doing his thing, but fretting because he doesn't want to forget his lines or he wants to do what he's supposed to do. And so you have this mixed bag of emotions, and the next thing you know, the play's over and he's not heard of again. And that character moved on, but that's where Job is. Look at his second part under this. Even if I try to be happy, what good would it do? He says, how can I move on or cheer up in verses 27 through 29? If I say I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my heaviness and comfort myself. This is a cheerful denial. I would call this self-deception, because nothing about his situation has really changed. He's just going to try and convince himself that he is okay and that everything is all right. And so he says, if I forget my complaint, in other words, if I just put it behind me and move on. And you hear people say that to folks that are struggling sometimes. You know, I think you just gotta put it behind you and move on. But if the situation hasn't rectified itself, is it going to be right just because you ignore it and move on? That's what Job is saying. I could look forward to a new day, but if he wakes up tomorrow, is his health back? Are his kids back? Is his wealth back? Is he, right with God? And we'll see here in a little bit that one probably is bothering him as much as anything else. I could leave off my heaviness. Literally, if you were going to translate this in English, it would say, I will forget my face. He's saying, listen, I have to forget my face. I have to forget what I look like. I have to forget the awful frown on my face because of how I feel. I literally have to forget my face and try and move on. And how do I move on from grieving? Well, you've heard people say, sometimes you just have to fake it till you make it. And Job's saying, but how do I fake it? And then the third part, he says, I could comfort myself at the end of verse 27. I can reassure myself that it's not too bad, and then I can accept comfort from others, but is it true, or is it just supposed to make me feel better? Because you sit here and you listen to these friends weigh in and give Job advice, and they're like, buddy, why don't you just confess to sin and get this over with and let God turn your life around and start blessing you? Well, how do you confess to something you're not aware of is Job's argument that he has here. And then in verse 28 and 29, Fellas, the root problem doesn't go away. You keep telling me, you keep giving me this advice about how to move on with my life, but the root problem doesn't go away. I am afraid of all my sorrows. I know that thou wilt not hold me innocent. If I be wicked, why then labor I in vain? If I try to deceive myself, if I just say, well, it's all better and I'm going to wake up tomorrow and it's going to be sunny and I'm going to fake it till I make it and I'm going to put all this behind me and just press on, he said it doesn't change the root problem. And the root problem here is not a loss of material things, and it's not a loss of his children. Did that crush him to the core? Absolutely. The root problem isn't even that he's dealing with a health problem, because he tells us right here what the root problem is. If I say, I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my heaviness and comfort myself, I am afraid of all my sorrows, I know, here's the root, that thou wilt not hold me innocent. And he's saying, I know my own heart, and I can't think of anything wicked that I've done, but if I be wicked, and that's why God is judging me, then if you don't fix the root problem, then you labor in vain. Because if he's doing all this because I sinned in my life, and I don't know what that is, so I don't know how to confess it and make it right, and if I just try to move on from it, is he going to suddenly bless me for what he judged me with? Seems like if he judged me before, he's going to have to keep judging me for it until the situation has been corrected. In other words, he is very, very concerned with his standing before God. Forgetting the grief and the sadness doesn't miraculously make him right with God. That's his statement, and he's right. It's true. It's excellent theology. If I really am wicked or guilty, and I must be wrong, you could put this in quotes in here, I must be wrong because God is not. You see what he's saying? He's saying, I know that you will condemn me if I be wicked, and I might be, because I know he's not. That's the statement that Job's making here to his friends. What is the use of acting like everything is good? Because I can act like everything is good, and y'all can act like everything is good, but God's the one that gets to decide when everything is good. And if he's judging me for sin, like you all are saying, and the relationship isn't made right with him, then acting like everything is good and ignoring it and moving on doesn't change anything. God still is going to hold me accountable. He has an excellent view of his God. He is, no wonder God held him up as someone that is holy and righteous and just. And we get to verses 30 and 31. And he says, cleaning up the outside doesn't really change anything. Boy, oh boy, I had to stop for a minute with this one. I was walking around the house doing some things and thinking, if the Pharisees and the Sadducees could have got a hold of this one, religion would have drastically changed in Jesus' day. I mean, think about it. But look at what he says here, because in verse 30 is the sight of man, and then verse 31 is in the sight of God, and they're two completely different things. If I wash myself with snow water and make my hands never so clean. Now, we look at that and we go, what in the world is he talking about? Well, you have to understand the old times. Snow water is as clean as it gets. There's no impurities from a creek. There's no impurities from a well. It just, snow fell out of the sky. So if you went up there, air pollution wasn't a huge thing to them. And they didn't think about that problem. So if you wanted to have the cleanest water around, you could grab some snow and melt it. And so the thought here is, you take this snow water that's not contaminated in any way, shape, or form, and I am going to symbolically wash myself so that I could be even cleaner than if I washed with regular water. You see what he's saying here? If I went to the extreme to bathe myself and clean myself, I could look clean as a whistle. But am I? Because Matthew chapter 23 and verse 25, Jesus is challenging the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he says, boys, you wash the outside of the cup and you wash off the rim, but you're filthy inside. Then if you think about it, if I was going to drink out of a cup, wouldn't you want to do the opposite? I'd rather wash the inside in the rim and have the outside be filthy than to wash the outside in the rim and have the inside be filthy. So the point that he's making here, Job has an excellent view long before the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Yeah, I can be a whitewashed sepulcher and I can be a clean cup on the outside, but nasty on the inside. The other way that this is, and a lot of commentaries differ as to which way it goes with this is symbolic. It's a token of innocence. Now, if you were in court and something happened, you could wash your hands and say, I'm innocent. It was a declaration that you weren't going to have anything to do with whatever nonsense was going to happen after that point. I wash my hands. We even use that phrase, right? You're sitting there and something's going down, you look at it and you say, boys, I wash my hands of this. In other words, I don't want to have anything farther to do with this. Job might be saying that because Psalm 26:6 and Psalm 73:13 talk about that. If I washed my hands in innocency. And we have the famous illustration of Pilate in Matthew 27:24. He has been trying to let Jesus go, and the Jews aren't going to have anything of it because he's the one that has to declare the death sentence, or they can't have him crucified. And so they stay after him, and when Pilate gets frustrated, he comes out there and says, I find no guilt in this man. And he calls for a bowl of water, and what does he do? This right here. He washes his hands ceremonially and says, I am innocent of the blood of this man. You want to kill him, see to it. Now, of course, the question is, if you wash your hands and hold them up for everybody to see, even if it's in snow water, and declare that you are innocent of this situation, is Pilate innocent of the death of Jesus Christ? He's the only one that could say, crucify him. And all he has to simply do, and we know that it had to happen, but if you're the only one that can say, crucify him, and you don't say it, then he doesn't get crucified. So washing your hands symbolically and holding him up and saying, I wash my hands of this matter, you might declare that you are innocent, but are you? And that's kind of Job's statement here. Yeah, I could get some snow water and I could wash my hands, but does it make me ceremonially clean? Or does it even make me symbolically clean? Or am I still guilty before God? Because basically the statement that he's making is, it doesn't matter what I think of myself. It really doesn't matter what others think of me. He is saying what really matters is what God thinks of me in verse 31. Yet shalt thou plunge me in the ditch, and mine own clothes shall abhor me. God knows what we hide from men. Samuel is supposed to anoint a new king, and everybody thinks, boy, it ought to be this guy right here. God tells Samuel, man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. In Hebrews 4:12, it tells us that his word is powerful enough to divide apart the soul and the spirit, the joints and the marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and the intents of the heart. And so Job's saying, I can pretend I'm wicked, I could wash myself, I could even declare myself clean, but God, I know that in your sight you'd plunge me into the ditch. You say, why in the world would God plunge him into the ditch? Well, ditches were dirty. This is just a statement of saying God will reveal how dirty I am, because the truth comes out, right? And then he goes so far as to say, my own clothes wouldn't want to have anything to do with such a filthy man. That's kind of funny. I've been around some homeless people you couldn't hardly stand to breathe. Their clothes never got off and ran away. But notice, Job's not trying to be funny. He's being really serious. He's saying, if you consider how harsh this judgment has been on me, then you think that whatever I did, and I don't know about it, it has to be awful. And if you try and hide that, my clothes wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. Because what happened to me is awful. I've lost everything. What an incredible statement that he makes. Then he goes on and he says, at the end here in verse 32 through 35, the last part, if only I had a mediator. God is not a man that I can talk with. Look at what he says. For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him and we should come together in judgment. God is far superior in his majesty. He's far superior in his power. He's far superior in his wisdom. And he's far superior in his justice. So there is no way that I could bring him into court and sit down and have a conversation with him, because I wouldn't even have the right to question him. When you think about how superior he is, you cannot debate with him as an equal, nor get any answers to allegations as to why, because there is nothing constraining him to answer. He didn't have to answer. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and his ways are higher than our ways. But what I really, really, really need is a mediator. 33, neither is there any daysman, that's a mediator, betwixt us, that might lay his hand upon us both. There is no go-between that can reconcile me to God. Reminds you of 1 Timothy 2, 5 and 6, because that's exactly what Jesus Christ is now for us. I want to turn there real quickly and read it to you, because, man, wouldn't it have been nice just to be able to, if you're one of Job's friends, to flip open the New Testament and share some promises with him? 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 5 and 6. For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all, to be testified in due time. You say, why is that so important? Well, the way that Job states it here is he says, I wish that there was a mediator that could lay hands on us both. And he's not talking about shaking you. Laying hands on someone would be able to identify with them. And Job's saying, listen, if I brought God into a courtroom, there's no reason why he should come into a courtroom to talk to somebody as low as I am. He said that over and over again in this chapter. But if he did, who would it be that would sit there and be the go-between, that could lay their hand on God and understand him and represent him properly? That's what the phrase means. And then they could walk over to this side of the room and put their hand on me and represent me properly. Who is it? Where would there be somebody that could take God's side of the situation and take my side of the situation and bring us together and rectify this? That's what Job's asking for. And that's the reason I wanted to read 1 Timothy 2, 5 and 6. Because that's what we have in Jesus Christ. Job's true pain here is not being able to reconcile with God. I just want to know why. I'd love to know why. And a just arbitrator has to be able to represent both sides. And I could see somebody that could sympathize with me and understand me, but they certainly couldn't understand God. And if someone were as holy and righteous and powerful as God, then how would they be able to sympathize with me? And we are so blessed because enter Jesus Christ. And notice that the way that he brings together is that he redeemed us. He paid the price. so that now our conversations and our relationship with God can happen. You can see here that Job's pain is a whole lot more about his spiritual life than it is about the physical problems that have been going on. And his physical problems are rough. Verse 34. It is not a conducive situation for a discussion. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. Now, again, this is poetry, and not a whole lot of uses of some of these words in other parts of the Bible. But rod is written kind of uniquely. There's a capital here that a lot of people say represents the number 9. That's what it stands for. And so what they're saying is, let him take his 9 judgments. So the rod would be the rod of judgments. If they took away the judgments, the rod of correction, then we could have a different conversation. Because I could approach him in a different way. But when you think about the 9 judgments that have fallen on Job, he's saying, how do you stand before a holy, righteous God and think you have any reason to bring an argument before him when he has judged you so harshly? That's the whole sum of what he's coming to here. Other folks say, no, it's not the rod, it's the scepter. I looked this up as best I could, and literally the Hebrew is a large stick. So is it the shepherd's rod, or is it the scepter of a king? It's hard to say. But if it's the scepter, then Job saw God as majestic on his throne, and you cannot approach him to talk to him. We see that in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, right? Nation of Israel is thrown in a tizzy because in the year that King Uzziah died. I mean, everything has changed politically for them, and everybody's heartbroken. Everybody's wondering where the kingdom's going to go. And everybody's looking at the earthly. And it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I see in the temple God high and lifted up. His train filled the temple. Smoke flying everywhere, and the cherubim are flying around crying, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter that Uzziah died, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the political situation, because he came face to face with how incredible God is. And Isaiah's response, we're familiar with it. What's he say? Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips. I'm in trouble here. I have no right to be standing here and seeing this, let alone opening my mouth before him and saying anything. That's where Job is. He's coming to the conclusion of answering his buddy Bildad, and he says, you know what, buddy? I am beside myself with fear of Almighty God's justice. And I have no right to come before him and have a conversation with him or drag him into court. And I can't think of any mediator that would put his hand on me and put a hand on God and bring us together and resolve this situation. The only way that I could come before God is if I was to deal with him in grace and mercy. Wow. I mean, what a statement. Every time they challenge this guy and tell him, oh, you sinned and you're not as good as you think you are, and he replies to him, you just sit there and say, Job should have wrote some commentaries. Where's the doctrinal handbook from Job? Because, man, he's laying it out there and saying, boys, I don't think you think about God the way I do. If there isn't mercy, love, and grace, you don't come before a holy God. Let alone open your mouth and have a discussion, be it far from me. And Isaiah said the exact same thing. And again, enter Jesus Christ. Because no greater love hath any man than this, that a man lay down his life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And that is the way that we come to God, is through mercy and grace. Because if we were coming to God before justice, we better have the same viewpoint, mindset that Isaiah and Job had. Woe is me, I'm not going there, boys. In verse 10, he's going to talk to God. He's done talking to Bildad. I'd be done talking to Bildad too, wouldn't you? I mean, these guys, their doctrine's awful. Their advice is awful. What are they really doing except for maybe Job is thinking about what he's saying and how he is viewing God and drawing some comfort from that? Because these good old boys aren't doing much help.